KGB Today, The Hidden Hand by John Barron. The KGB's job was essentially to silence dissent. They had other jobs too, but mostly it was just to shut people up, to disappear them, to take them to a prison or to kill them. To give you a better idea of what the KGB was about, just look at what our NSA, CIA, and FBI do in the U.S. For one, they conspire with tech companies to silence dissent. They assist in canceling those they don't like Kanye West or Alex Jones. And you can always tell who the government-approved socialists are when you see them, such as Jimmy Kimmel, Stephen Colbert, Jimmy Fallon. Those who follow along and do as they're told are propped up, and those who don't are eliminated from mainstream society. Don't get me wrong, the U.S. is not communist. The U.S. is fascist. It's when companies and government work together. That's fascism. The KGB institutionalized the perversion of psychiatry for purposes of political repression. The KGB psychiatrists would say that someone who is against the regime, this person is having paranoid delusions of reforming society. That was a condition these people had. This gave the KGB the power to torture victims as they please, and degrading them into zombies with drugs that destroy the mind and spirit. Anyone incapable of adapting to the socialist reality were deemed insane. During the vaccine rollout, there was a war between vaxxers and anti-vaxxers, and I still think this is ongoing, but it's not as much as it was. The media called anti-vaxxers mentally unstable, called them evil, heartless, uncaring, stupid, and that we shouldn't be part of society. This is the power of government-approved media. Here's an example, a tweet from Piers Morgan back in November of 2021. He said, "Imagine being scared of having a safe, well-regulated 4 seconds vaccine shot when previous generations braved gunshots for years on end to save us all from tyranny. Anti-vaxxers really are a bunch of spineless pussies." Those are typical tweets from last year. They were just trying to make anti-vaxxers, or people who just didn't trust the vaccine, to make all of us look bad. I would be labeled an anti-vaxxer because I didn't trust the vaccine. It's experimental. That's all. I mean, I'm not against vaccines. I think some vaccines are necessary. I just don't think that particular vaccine is necessary. The KGB also involved itself in international terrorism, sabotage, abduction, and assassination. One of the perpetrators of communism, Vladimir Lenin, once said, "My words were calculated to evoke hatred, aversion, and contempt, not to convince, but to break up the ranks of the opponent, not to correct the opponent's mistake, but to destroy him, to wipe his organization off the face of the earth." This kind of violent rhetoric reminds me of Democratic politicians calling for the death of Trump and violence against members of the Trump administration. Maxine Waters, she said, "If you see anybody from the cabinet in a restaurant, in a department store, at a gasoline station, you get out and you create a crowd and you push back on them and you tell them that they are not welcome anymore, anywhere." When Black Lives Matter and Antifa were rioting across the nation, the government-approved media like CNN, MSNBC, they said the riots were mostly peaceful, while buildings were burning to the ground behind them. Amazing, right? Also, the CIA are involved in overturning elections in other countries. They subvert democracies worldwide and cause chaos in order to appoint their puppet leader. Vladimir Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, is a perfect example of this. He's a puppet president appointed by the U.S. government. The communists believed then and believe today that true communism will flood the land with an abundance of goods and services and all material things that we so desire. True communism would reform human nature and bring about the final stage in human evolution by creating the new communist man, or the perfect being. The Soviet definition of peace meant that communism prevailed throughout the world. Once all mankind lives under communism, all will be tranquil. This is the goal of the U.S. government, I think, except their idea of the new communist man is a fat, transgendered man who doesn't question the government and doesn't have a will of his own. The truth is, where communism has been tried, it has failed. Under communism, life expectancy is shorter, infant mortality increases, medical equipment is in short supply, there are less goods and services like meat, vegetables, agriculture fails, buildings deteriorate, infrastructure crumbles, and the black market creates millionaires out of those who go outside of the system. Just look at North Korea and Venezuela. This is what communism devolves into. Communism also erodes the human spirit. People become alcoholics and drug addicts just to escape the tyrannical rule under which they live. Aristotle wrote that the successful tyrant must spiritually isolate each citizen from one another. He must persuade each that no one cares about him, that he is hopelessly and helplessly alone against the overpowering, omnipresent might of the tyrant. If terror never ceased, the system would collapse. And we have the police. They enforce any law that they themselves may not even agree with, but they enforce laws because they like the power. They'll even attack people for just looking in their direction. I mean, they have all kinds of power over us just because they have the government behind them. Those in power, political power, accept bribes to get key positions in government, and they also break laws without any worry of prosecution. The oligarchy preserves itself through tyranny. They do this by infesting the society with spies. Fear that the state will always be watching and listening paralyzes most people with fear. See, they had the KGB, we have the NSA. When a Soviet citizen openly protests a perceived injustice or tyranny, he is in effect declaring to the oligarchy, do with me what you will. Impoverish my family. Lock me in a concentration camp. Put me in a mental institution and drug me into a zombie. But I will no longer play by your rules. I no longer will be afraid. In the USA, we have the NSA that's always watching and monitoring our online activity. And if somebody says something out of line, they'll send the FBI to your house. And also, in the USA, politicians start off with barely any money and leave office with millions of dollars. Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, the Clintons, these are just a few of the multimillionaires who didn't start off that way. But when they left office, they left with millions of dollars. Now, Nancy Pelosi is still in office right now, and she is currently very, very wealthy. Torturers stuck needles under fingernails and into genitalia. They seared flesh with white-hot irons. They jerked out teeth with pliers and put victims into an iron cage whose walls closed in. So it would crack bones and compress bodies into extinction. They also tortured wives and kids of dissidents. In our country, you could say the torture is mental and physical. If someone doesn't agree with the government or says something they don't agree with, then that person is ridiculed by the government-approved media. Banks will cancel their accounts and so forth. For example, Kanye West, he's saying things that aren't very popular at the moment, and he is being canceled. He is being called mentally ill. It's the same progression and the same tactics that they used in the Soviet Union. The KGB's active measures program of political warfare sought to pervert perceptions of reality by striking at the vulnerabilities of free societies. Propaganda was introduced as a regular instrument of international relations. They would dupe foreigners by stage managing visits to the Soviet Union to make it appear that it was a moral, orderly, and clean society. Meanwhile, the secret police were murdering hundreds of thousands of Soviet citizens and herding countless others into concentration camps. Even the famous writer George Bernard Shaw was duped into believing that Stalin was a blessing for the Soviet people. In the United States, government-approved media constantly perverts reality. You are forced to agree with their agenda, or you're anti-something. You're anti-vax, you're transphobic, you're homophobic, and so forth. The KGB produced forgeries and showed the press proof that the United States were guilty of some crime or other. They forged letters that were sent to Reagan and other American leaders in order to cause a conflict with another country. Soviet propagandists were not interested in truth. The truth was whatever served their interests at the moment. And this reminds me of the faked Steele dossier that Hillary Clinton paid for to smear Trump with. It was fake. Everybody knew it was fake, but the media had to pretend it was real because truth didn't matter. What mattered was the smear campaign. There are a number of parallels between this book and what's currently happening in the U.S. It's an old book, and it was published in 1983. I'm sure it's probably free online as a PDF. If not, you can buy it on eBay. There's a lot more to the book that I didn't mention. There are stories and things like that, and spy programs and stuff. But I just gave you the gist of it. Anyway, talk to you later. Bye.